Hey everyone, welcome to the first official installment of our new vlog series called Cutting the Cord. This series is going to look at the ways in which we have learned to do family relationships in ways that have not served us well. Today, I want to talk first about the underlying premise for our series, which is to examine the difference in motivation between love and obligation. I did a little research, a little reading, trying to understand the usage of these words, in particular, the word obligation. One thing that struck me deeply is that the origins of the word from which we get obligate and obligation has as the center of its meaning to be tied up, to be bound. Obligation is at its core bondage. On the other hand, there's another word that's similar in spelling that does not get often used in American English, which is the word oblige. To be obliged for or to something or someone has at its core meaning gratitude in response for something that has been received as a result of that thing or person to whom we are obliged. For example, if someone has done something for me and I feel gratitude, I might say, if I were in Britain, for example, I'm obliged to you. I also remember hearing that in maybe some old-fashioned cowboy movies or something like that. But we don't use that word often, at least in my experience. Whereas in many ways, the resulting feeling or expectation or even demand that is often felt as a result of someone doing something for me is that I am now obligated to them. I am tied or bound to them for something. What that something is seems to be not in my control. It seems to be the demand, expectation, whatever the word is you might want to use, of the other person to determine what it is that I have just bound myself to in response. Sometimes this might feel like a quid pro quo. I did this, therefore you do this. But when we're talking about family relationships, these bonds between people are so much more complicated, convoluted, and challenging than other relationships because of stories of what family loyalty means. On the other hand, if we take obliged, meaning gratitude, further, we come to love as the motivation behind what we do. When we are motivated by love, we have no expectation of receiving anything in return. We do because it flows out of a renewing, energizing resource within us that doesn't require anything back in return to refuel, because the love itself is, if you will, the rechargeable battery behind what I'm doing. Now, as humans, we do this really imperfectly. Yet, there are some relationships in which this is easier to do than in others, where those binds, those bondage pieces of obligation aren't as present or not present at all. And so it becomes much more easy to do things for others, for the world, for the community, for myself, because I do not feel the bondage of what I must owe in return, or what must be owed to me. This is a challenging thing to discuss, particularly in the family relationships. And what we're going to focus on primarily is what it is to create a love-driven model of relationships between adult children and their parents versus the largely obligating one in which we have been raised and trained and programmed. There may be different degrees of obligation in your family system, and I have yet to encounter anyone who has not experienced some level of obligation-driven expectations, rules of engagement, the roles that we play that we must show up as in our family. I don't know anyone for whom love is the only motivation, which means, in a nutshell, we all have some work to do. As adults, it's very difficult to navigate what it means to engage relationship with our parents. There are two diametrically opposed forces happening. When children grow and age, it is psychologically, theologically, biologically imperative that that child grow into their own person. That over the course of time in their later teens, and sometimes it might happen a little later now, the stages of development have been pushed back a little bit just because of the evolution of culture and influences on that, and the effects of parenting. Our children to not be able to understand their emotions, themselves, their identity well because of these family obligations, these expectations, which we'll talk about in a little while when we talk about family roles. But it is normal, I'm going to scratch that word because that's not a very helpful word. We're going to say healthy for a child over the latter teen, early 20s age years to differentiate, to become their own person apart from the family. This process is so vital to that child growing into the kind of adult that is a contribution to the planet, that knows what it is to have responsibilities, to own their responsibilities, to choose to do what is required of them, to follow a career path or a family path in a way in which they are able to take responsibility for what is theirs to be responsible for. And yet, at the same time, there seems to be another force opposing that differentiation from the parents. The parents tend to struggle with letting go, with letting their child become an adult for whom their role is finished, completed. By definition, when that process starts to happen and moves towards completion as the adult child becomes their own adult, the parental role must change. In my experience, the onus, the bigger responsibility falls on the parent or parents to be the ones to see, name, accept, and move towards that reality. The child becoming adult and adult child tends to feel this need more organically because that is a natural biological, emotional, psychological process to become your own person. So we have two forces working in opposition. The natural, healthy process of individuation, of becoming who you were created to be and moving towards the best version of yourself, which seems to then boom right into the parental expectation that nothing changes or very little changes, and that their parental role continues in the same way that it was required for when they were small. The rule making, the expectations of belief and behavior. To have a healthy, growing, mutually satisfying, mutually benefiting, mutually calling out the best versions of ourselves relationship between adult child and parent requires change. We get back now to the difference between love and obligation. As parents, I see people obligating their children, even into adulthood, to be a certain picture of the parental expectation that they will visit this often, or do these things for me, or be the good son, be the good daughter. And all of those things are not untrue, but when they are demanded, when they are born from you owe me, I raised you, you owe me, then we have completely bastardized the entire process. Obligation, to be bound, is to take away the free will and choice of the child. And that can happen from the beginning, from before birth, but especially into adulthood. It diminishes the personhood and the autonomy of the adult child. This is the question I can always come back to in my mind. What is it in the parent? What story are they telling about themselves that makes it so scary to release their child and set them free to choose? Wouldn't a parent much rather know that the child, adult or even younger, is choosing relationship because that's what they want to choose, not because it's what they're being forced to, what they're being demanded to do, what they're being obligated to? Because at the end of the day, everybody feels the obligation. At the end of the day, everyone feels icky. Yes, it's a risk to set the child, whatever age they might be, if they're 18 or 34 or 64, to set them free to choose is a risk. No doubt about it. Especially if they're older and you've been doing it this way for a long time. What if they don't call? What if they don't come over? What if they, whatever that might be? But truly, can the risk be worth the possible reward of a relationship based on choice, love, mutuality, rather than demand and expectation, which is, by definition, the two arms of obligation? This is challenging, no doubt about it. But to be clear, from my point of view, a child owes nothing to their parent for parenting them. It was not the child's choice to be born. It was not the child's choice to be your child. even in the most difficult of circumstances, the child's existence is based on parental choice, on an adult's choice. To demand your child be obligated, bound, tied up to you because you parented them bastardizes the entire relationship. The child, yes, in a perfect world, but the child by nature has a legitimate expectation of the parent to provide for their needs. That's the job of the parent. This relationship is a job for which, if obligation is the fuel, as that child grows, they will continue a relationship with you either out of obligation, which, trust me, is no fun. And then they will teach their children to be obligated, tied to, bound to them in the same way. And we create generation after generation after generation of people who are not given nor choose permission for themselves to become fully who they were created to be. We look at what we see in the world in terms of emotional immaturity, in terms of behavior, in terms of values, morality, relationships, whatever it is. And for me, it is the result of generations of children being raised solely by obligation, solely by, I expect you to behave this way, and never being given space to process what it means to be fully human, to engage in the full range of emotional reality as a human, to make choices on their own without fear of threat or retribution by a parent, to choose a different path, even if the parent knows it will cause harm. And even more so, even if it's not what the parent would choose for the child. Do we want relational connection as family to be ones that create loyalty, meaning obligation? Do we want loyalty to be something that, instead of creating safety, actually creates harm? Anything that is demanded, anything that is expected, anything that is obligated diminishes the choice and the free will of the other person. Those relationships never bear fruit in the ways that we desire. They bear fruit, all right. But it's not the picture, the image, the fantasy even of what raising your child looks like in later years. So I leave you with a question. Are you a parent? Bless you. It's hard work, no doubt about it. And what is it in your story that has taught you that demands, expectations, and obligations are the ways and means by which you get what you want from your kids? The end of the day, our kids are the kids, and they're going to do what they choose. And their actions always, always, always trigger the story that's deep within us. If we don't contend with what that story is, we cannot choose to release it and release them from obligation to create a relationship based on love. For example, what are you so afraid of will happen? What are the stories that you have told yourself about what your child is owed? What your child owes to you? What are the stories within you and how you were raised to expect, demand, obligate a child to never express certain emotions, to follow a certain career path, to go to a certain university, to marry a certain person, to raise their kids a certain way, to come to Sunday dinners? I'm sorry, but Blue Bloods, that is just in many ways such an obligation. And yet there's a way to create that reality that sustains itself from love. And this love can span great distance. It's not as common anymore for the children and the generations to stay close together. But if we can release the obligation, the expectations, the demands, the fantasy of what relationship with your child looks like as they become adults and then have children of their own, then we can create relationships fueled by love, which transcend the boundaries of time and space. Many years ago, I worked for a priest who always finished his funeral homilies with this line, and it has stuck with me for years, and it's very applicable here. He would say, "The only thing we take with us when we die is love. We were created with love, in love, by love, capital L, God, who is love, and we return to love with the love that we've experienced in human form on this planet." Wouldn't it be amazing to create a reality in which the love that we bring back to our Creator is not soiled, marred, misshapen, misinterpreted, malformed by obligation, just a little bit. So that's the vision for this series. Not to shame and blame, but to cast a new vision in which parent and adult child move from parent and child to parent and adult child, two equal parties in a relationship that both have choice, autonomy, will, free will, and the imagination, the creativity to shift the relationship to one that is fueled by and regenerated by love, free from obligation. That's where we're going. I hope that you'll hang in there with me as we do this work. Hard questions, hard stories to wrestle with, old, deeply rooted stories. And it's good. It's good. Thanks for joining me in this first installment, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.